Very good morning to all of you. Today we are going to talk about blueprinting in educational assessment. I am Sitanshu, working as additional professor in the Department of Preventive and Social Medicine, JIPMER. I have been associated with the medical education unit of JIPMER since 2012. I am also a FAMER fellow at PSG Coimbatore from 2012. And I have been a faculty in that institute since 2015. So what we are going to discuss today is the objectives are as follows. We'll be talking about the need of having a blueprint in each specialty, describe the process of developing a blueprint, and discuss the challenges of developing a blueprint. So the objectives are quite simple. We'll talk about three important things in blueprinting today. The first one being need for having a blueprint in each specialty, the process of developing a blueprint, and the challenges associated with it. Now, before we start the process of blueprinting, development of that, we need to understand the assessment process in medical school. Now, this is what happens. Usually the students are very happy in their own setup. So when they're working, they are being taught by us in our medical college, they are quite happy. But the emotion changes when the examination starts happening. So in the written exam, slowly the emotion changes to this crying face. And in the practical exam, the emotion goes to the extreme. Now, why this happens? Is this a hypothetical scenario, or is it already documented in medical literature? If you look at some of the literature where this has been documented, where people feel that the questions were too vague, what to write, what not to write, long questions are bouncer, all questions are from few systems only, and too lengthy paper, time was not enough to write, all these things are being documented in literature. Now, why this disconnect happens? The disconnect happens because in our setup, when we talk or teach or facilitate learning, the teacher has got a certain mindset, or the way they teach is different. They put emphasis on different subjects. So subsequently, the question paper usually set by a person who is outside the university. Their mindset is different. They have a different perception about which questions are important, what are the things that should be given importance. And finally, when the examiner comes from another university, there is a lot of disconnect between these three setups. If you look at, there are three stakeholders in the examination process. Apart from the learner, we have teacher, question paper setter, and examiner. And there is a disconnect between all of these three people because we teach in a certain way, the question paper setter puts the question in certain way, and the examiner in clinical examination or in practical, they assess in a different way. So this disconnect usually is found in medical schools. Now, what is the solution for this? If you look at the Medical Council of India, the competency-based undergraduate curriculum that just came up in 2019, they also give a solution for this. They say a blueprint may be needed to decide which competencies should be assessed during internal assessment and which should go for summative or university examination. So this is the solution, and this is not something new. This has been there for a long period of time. It has been told in the previous gadget, where in 1997 they also talked about blueprinting a systematic pattern of framing questions and making a table of specification. Now, if you look at the assessment opportunities that we have in our medical schools, broadly it is divided into three categories. The first one being the summative assessment. It is usually the university examination that happens at the end of the term or professional profession. Then we make a pass or fail decision because of this assessment in summative assessment. The second one is formative assessment, where it is done during the process of instruction, and the primary purpose of formative assessment is to offer feedback for improving learning. And there is something called internal assessment that we have taken a middle path, and sometimes it is added to the final summative assessment marks, but sometimes it is kept separate. Various institutions follow different guidelines. So these are the three broad ways or opportunities we have for assessment of students. Now, where blueprint fits in all this scheme of things. Now, if you look at what is a blueprint, the first thing is the definition as per the Oxford Dictionary is, it is a plan for a building or a machine with white lines on a blue background. Let me show you a picture. This is how the blueprint actually looks, and it came from architecture. So, if you look at this diagram clearly, if you say there is a blue background, and let me use the pointer. Yeah. So you have some white lines in a blue background. So basically, looking at the blueprint, what we can do is we can find out, this is a blueprint of a house where we can say where is the kitchen, where is the, how many rooms will be there in the first floor, what will be the size of the window or doors, where it will be located. So it gives you a plan or a plan of action for the future construction. Similarly, in medical education, if you look at what is a blueprint, it's nothing but a table of specification. What does that mean? It's a table. It's just a table. It can be a 2x2 table, 3x2 table, 3x6 table. So this is a table, and the table contains three things. It's content. It's a grid of content, domains, and tools of assessment, and it indicates the marks carried by each question. So this is what we are going to talk about and see how can we develop a blueprint in medical and in our specialty. Now, is it a very new concept, or it has been there in school for long? See, if you look at the CBSE curriculum, if you Kendriya Vidyalaya Sangathan, if you see, there is a lot of blueprints available from class 6th onwards. If you this table is actually the blueprint for the science subject in class 8, where in one side we have the contents or the lessons, and in the top you can see there are marks. It indicates the marks. BSA is very short answer, essay is short answer, essay 1 and essay 2 with different marking pattern, and long answer question, and it talks about total marks. Now this very short answer questions, if you see, it adds up to 20, and like that it comes. So this table actually indicates or tells that relative importance of each of these topics, how many marks should be there and how it is distributed. So, and they also talk about something called difficulty level, which is otherwise known as higher order thinking skills or HOTS. It is also being given in the school curriculum level. See, easy questions, what percentage of weightage should be there, average questions, what is the percentage, around 60%, and for higher order thinking skills, we have something about 10%. So when the school curriculum follows this, why not in medical school we do this? Why we should not be doing this? It is a very important tool, and we'll see there are some challenges of doing it, but we'll see how we can overcome these challenges. So before we start any system of assessment or to start the blueprinting process, we need to consider certain points. The first point being, who am I assessing? Is it the undergraduate or postgraduate? Because in the undergraduate curriculum, if you look at the weightage that we give to various domains of learning will be little different than the postgraduate assessment. The second question that we should ask is, why am I assessing? Is it for formative, whether my intention is to give feedback, or I'm going to make a pass or fail decision? The final thing is, how do I assess? Because as per the Miller's competency pyramid, if you look at, there are different levels of clinical competency that a person achieves. That goes from knows how, shows how, and does. So in this, the scope of today's webinar we'll be talking about undergraduate curriculum and undergraduate students. We'll be talking about summative assessment, and we'll look at all these things. The only difference is that we don't usually does level assessment is not followed for MBBS students, because the clinical cases and everything, they are always done under certain supervision. So this is the difference that we're going to, and this is our scope: undergraduate students, summative assessment, and to develop a blueprint in that. So how does a blueprint help? So you've been talking about what is a blueprint. I have told that it's a table. It's a table of specification of three things. It talks about the contents, the methods, tools of assessment, and the weightage for each competency. Now, because if the blueprint is available, it will make the assessment process transparent and clear. It serves as a template for learners, the question paper setter, and the examiner. The disconnect that we discussed earlier can be minimized. I'm not telling that we can completely avoid it, but we can minimize it. It's like a bias. Bias cannot be completely avoided, but it can be minimized. The second thing is it specifies the weightage for various domains. What is important and what is expected out of them is given more importance rather than what is the fancy items or fancy syndromes that we talk about. This third thing is setting questions as per the norms and guidelines. If we have done this blueprint, then the question paper setter, who is a person who is usually outside the university or from different medical colleges, they will have an idea about how do we set questions, from where to put questions, short answers from or long answer from. The fourth point is it reduces validity threat. Now, validity is a very important concept in assessment because validity indicates what it purpose to measure. That means if we are looking at cognitive assessment, we should be always doing a written test. But if you are looking at skill assessment, written test will not help. That means written test for skill assessment or procedural skills assessment is not a valid instrument. So now, how do you reduce this validity threats? There are two threats of validity that happens usually in medical assessment process. There are many, but these two are very important. These two, one is the construct underrepresentation, and second is construct irrelevant variance, CU and CIV. Now, what does this mean? CU is we are asking too few items. That means our sample is very less. So in that case, a few items are being asked so that we don't know, we are not covering the whole area. In this case, we are actually committing the error of construct underrepresentation. And in blueprint, if we develop it properly, it tries to address this issue. The second thing is construct irrelevant variance. In this case, I'll highlight one point about biased items. What happens, medical teachers, we think when we put questions, it should be always something new, something great, something very, very recent. That is good to ask, but the important thing what we should do is we must have given that opportunity for the students to learn about that particular thing. Now we go to a conference, we learn new things, we come back and ask in our questions. That is not fair. Why? Because what we should do is, if we have gone to a conference, you come back and take a class for them and educate them about the recent advances, then you can ask. We are not testing ourselves. We are testing what is expected of the students at the end of the MBBS curriculum and how he can practice as per the prescribed competencies or guidelines by a body like MCA. Now, the fifth point about how the blueprint helps is actually helps to bring constructive alignment of educational spiral. As earlier it was told, the assessment is the tail that works the curriculum dog. So if we make our assessment process appropriate and proper, then everything falls into place, like the teaching learning methods and the educational objectives. So that is what educational spiral is all about. Educational spiral includes three things: the objectives, the second is teaching learning methods, and the assessment process. Now, having understood the need of a blueprint and what is a blueprint, now let's go to the topic, the second section of how to develop a blueprint. And now in this section, first I'll take you through an example that is given in a book or a literature available in the literature. Then we'll see how we have done blueprint in Department of Preventive and Social Medicine using a simple software Excel. That is how it is to be developed. Now, there are steps of developing a blueprint, usually 4, and sometimes it is said 5. I'll tell you about that. The first one is define the purpose and scope of assessment. The second is assigning weights to various components like contents, domain of learning, and methods of assessment. The third one is decide total weightage and number of items to be included in assessment. And the fourth one is we develop a table of specification. Sometimes literature also says that question paper setting is also a component of a blueprint, but I'll limit myself to these 4 steps. Question paper setting is altogether a different ball game. We should have a separate session for that. So let's come to the first one. Define the purpose and scope of assessment. You remember the 4 questions that I asked you in the beginning, 3 questions. In fact, the first one is whether we are doing it for undergraduate or postgraduate training, whether the assessment is targeted towards providing feedback, or we are trying to look at the pass or fail decision, which is assessment of learning. The models of competency, as Miller has given it about the 4 layers of clinical competency that we go. This is what it is. It says knows how, shows how, and does. And for each of these subcomponents, what we can do is there are tests available or tools available. Like for knows how easily is the cognitive domain, where we can limit ourselves to the written method of assessment like MCQ, short answer, long answer, and oral also has got an attitude component to it. We'll talk about that a little later. Shows how basically is the OSCE or the practical examinations that is being conducted. Does, for MBBS teaching, usually we don't go there because it has got performance assessment in real life. So we limit ourselves to shows how level. So after having identified the scope of the examination, one important thing about your university guidelines, how many usually given by the university. So though as a medical educator we have some role in that, but later on we will try to develop a blueprint as per the guideline prescribed in the university or in the by the dean's office. So the first point is define purpose and scope of assessment. The second one is, please read this statement, and this statement is quite self-explanatory when it says all that is expected cannot be taught and all that is taught cannot be assessed. So if we agree to this statement, what we should do is, how do we then ascertain relative importance of a topic? How do you give which topic is more important for a learner to learn? So now in this case, the first thing what we do is we rely on our friend, and this chapter should be taught at length. The second part is the experts or stakeholders' judgment. It is always good to go out from your own judgment to include a collective judgment thing. That means you have to involve 4 or 5 people or experts in the group. Also involve some other stakeholders from who are, for MBBS, it is usually good to involve the primary medical officers in the PHCs who are working there, because they are the end user. Ultimately, they have to go there and work in certain time unless they do the super specialization. The third thing is there are certain, if we look at the market, where they're going and what type of jobs they're doing, and healthcare utilization survey, the burden of disease will also tell us that which subject or importance that we should be relying on. For example, if you look at the example of healthcare utilization, if you look at the global burden of disease studies, it tells the top 10 killers of in India or in various states. So what will happen is, so if we do that way, so the healthcare utilization survey will give an indication that we should be focusing more on those topics where the burden is more, or the mortality. The burden is usually defined in 2 terms, the morbidity and mortality. There we should pay our attention to at the MBBS level. So this is how we give relative importance of a topic. Is there any other way of assigning weights to this particular to the subject that we are teaching in our specialty? What we should do is, there are the topics, weights can be given in various ways, but the 2 common thing that people do is classify them as per impact and frequency of the condition. Now, how impact is subdivided: if it is not urgent, little prevention potential, it is given a weight of 1 out of a scale of 1 to 3, serious but not life-threatening 2, and life-threatening emergencies are given a weight of 3. Now this the importance and the impact is defined in one way, but there is also it is also imperative to consider that the frequency of the occurrence of the condition should also be kept in mind. If the condition is rarely seen, it is given a scale a score of 1. Relatively common, it is given a scale of 2, and very common, it is 3. So this is how it is. We give scales, and then we multiply it to get the weightage. So weightage is a multiplication of impact
into frequency. So that this is not the only way to give weightage for clinical or the other subjects. There can be other ways of doing it, that like suppose opportunity to learn in another subject. Suppose the course should be given some more importance in your specialty. You can also have impact, frequency, and opportunity to learn. So this is the multiplication. The principles of probability comes here, and you try to give weightage for each of these subjects. Now, how do you assign weightage for basic sciences? So that what I discussed little earlier was for the clinical subjects. Now for basic sciences, what do? You give importance like this, like the weights are classified as 1, 2, 3 with little clinical application, moderate clinical application, and high clinical application. So you give 1, 2, 3 and try to do classify your subjects as per the weight. Now let's come back to computation of weights. Now suppose I'm taking you through a hypothetical scenario. Suppose we are talking about 3 topics in a specialty: renal, respiratory, and cardiovascular system, which is written in this side, and impact and frequency. So the impact and frequency scores are usually, as I discussed earlier, it can be by the experts or the stakeholder involvement. So for the renal course, they have given impact of 1 and frequency of 2. So impact of 1 means little prevention potential, frequency of 2 means moderately seen condition. So you have to multiply I into F to get the score for renal course. So it is 2 here. So for respiratory, it is given as 2 and 2. So let me go back to the previous slide where we see, again, revisit this particular slide. 2 means serious but not life-threatening, and 3 means life-threatening emergencies. So if you consider that particular classification, respiratory comes under 2 into 2, so it gives 4. So this was given by the experts and other stakeholders. Now cardiovascular system is also given the highest 3 into 3, which is coming to 9. So you add 2 plus 4 plus 9, it comes to 15. So the total weights for these 3 subjects are given as 15. Now, just hold on to that particular thought. We'll come back to that in subsequent slide. Now, the second part is, after having given weights to the subject or the content, the second part is domain. Remember, I told blueprinting is a grid of 3 things. 1 is content, second is domain, and third is the tools of assessment. So we are now coming to the domain of assessment. As we know, the domain of learning in medical education usually is 3. It is cognitive, then second is psychomotor, or the third one is affective domain. So how do we give weightage to these domains? So cognitive, psychomotor, affective, as per the Miller's pyramid, it comes under knows how, psychomotor is shows how, and affective also comes under shows how. So there are different tools available for assessing these things. Like in the cognitive, also if you look at the Bloom's taxonomy of classification, there are various domains are also told in that, starting from recall till creation. So the simpler way of classifying it is lower order thinking and higher order thinking. So lower order thinking includes recall and understanding, and higher order thinking starts from analysis onwards. So there are some different classification, different schools of thoughts, but we'll stick to that. Now, recall of or lower order thinking skills are usually assessed by MCQ, short answer questions, problem solving skills by short answer questions and long answer questions. MCQ can also be for problem solving skills depending upon the way we formulate it. The second one is psychomotor skill. In this, it is usually the practical or OSCE that can be done. Affective or communication, when we are assessing, it is OSCE. So these 3 domains now we have to give weights to them. So the third thing is the tools. The tools are it's linked to the domains. So the tools that or methods of assessment we are going to use in our final summative assessment is MCQ, SAQ, LAQs, and OSCE. So having understood the content, the domains of learning, and the tools, now let's look at what are the challenges of assigning weights. So when I'm telling, now in this previous example, in cognitive, if we say that, okay, cognitive will be given some weightage, that you will get from your dean's office. What percentage? So suppose for an example of a 400 marks question examination pattern for a subject, what percentage should go to cognitive domain and what percentage should go to psychomotor and affective? So basically theory and practical. So what is that is defined by the university itself. And within that subject, the question papers, what percentage should come to MCQ, SAQs, LAQs are also defined in the university. So now, what are the challenges in assigning weights? Because it's an intensive process, it takes time, you have to talk to people, you have to get consensus. It should not be that it is only done by in single individual. There is some degree of subjectivity or element of subjectivity is there. We cannot be 100% objective. I feel that this particular chapter should be given weightage. The others may agree, may not agree. So, but anyway, we have to deal with it. We can minimize it by increasing our sample size, involving more people, but there will be some degree of subjectivity always in this. Consensus opinion within the specialty and outside across the specialty always helps. So it is always good to talk to the other departments and see whether these concepts are being applied there or not. It's always a good practice to involve the past learners. The best persons to be talked about this particular thing is to talk to the house surgeons or interns in your institute. They will tell what are the type of cases they are observing in this field. So these are the challenges that are there in assigning weights. Now the third point is number of items to be included. Items here means the number of marks. So how many items to be included in the assessment process? That depends upon, again, the university, the marking pattern that they do. If the domain of interest is such a large domain as per the medical curriculum, if we take a small test sample, the probability of being unhappy in the previous slide, the first or second slide, we saw that the students were complaining. It came from one particular subject. The other systems were not represented. That is more. But if you take a larger test sample, then the probability of being happy is more, because then it will cover a large area. So this is what we should keep in mind, and we should decide the number of items. So it has been mentioned in the literature that 50 to 60 items achieves a test reliability of 0.8 for a discrimination index difference of 0.03. So usually we take about 50 to 60 items. In Western literature, it says items because they usually rely heavily on MCQs. So each item is equated to 1 mark. But in our system, we have short answers and long answer questions. So the number of items will be less for us. So the best thing to remember is we can make our questions structured so the number of segments or items can be increased. So maximum we should have 100 items. Beyond that, there is no additional benefit, and minimum should be 30 in the literature it says, but 50 to 60 items should gives a test reliability of 0.8. Now that we also should need to understand and keep in mind that feasibility or time of resources should always be kept in mind, because if we have multiple items but we don't have people to conduct or administer the test, it becomes very difficult. So that is another important component to remember. Now coming back to the table that we left with, where we gave weights for our subjects like renal, respiratory and cardiovascular system, and we reached here about a total, the total weight of 15. Now if we start taking the percentage, the weightage for the specialty or the subject is calculated as I into F by T. What does that mean? So it is the weights for renal course comes as 2. The total weight is 15. So the ratio comes to 2 by 15 or 13% if we convert it into percentage. Respiratory 4 by 15 is 27%. 9 by 15 is 60% for cardiovascular system. So the total marks that we have at our disposal should be distributed in this manner for the different subjects. Now the total marks, if we have 60, for example, if I take this in this hypothetical example, where we're talking about the total assessment processes of 60 marks, then the 8 marks will come from renal, 16 marks will come from respiratory system, and 36 marks will come from cardiovascular system. So, and how did we get this? This came from the multiplication of I and F. I stands for impact, F stands for frequency. And it was this scales or this scores are given by experts, and it was built up in a consensus process, and then we get the marks for it. So having got 60, what we are going to do now is we talk about the distribution of marks, where I was talking about the role of universities or dean's office there. So the theory paper marks, suppose we tell it is 42, and practical examination is for 18 marks. In practical, we look at the procedural skills and affective domain, and in theory, it is the cognitive component. So 42 marks and 18 marks. Now, this is how the table of specification looks. So we have sorted out certain things. We are talking about, let's start again from the beginning. So the first thing, because I told this is a grid or a table, the table contains the content sections like renal, respiratory, and cardiovascular system. Then there is a total mark distribution, and we have got these domains like cognitive domain is represented here in the first 4 columns, cognitive domain under the MCQ and SAQs, and affective and procedural skills domain is reflected in the OSCE component. Under the MCQ, again, if we have to decide that what percentage should be lower order thinking or knows only the recall level, we should also make we can also factor that in. So knows how. So there will be some difference. So if we want medical school people to learn 1/3 to be knows and 2/3 to be knows how, so more weightage is given to knows how component, because they will be dealing with real life scenario. You can decide 50-50, or you can give more percentage to knows or knows how. So 60 for knows also is possible. So that is again another round of discussion with the experts, and you can decide how strict your threshold you want to be. Because you remember, if it is more towards this domain, knows how or higher order thinking skill, it takes a lot of time for question paper setting, and our teaching learning should also be aligned like that. We should also give them the real life scenario for teaching in our classes or sessions. So this is how the table looks. So start decoding the table. Now let me put the numbers there. It's like a Sudoku game. How do you fit the numbers there? So content area, renal, respiratory, and cardiovascular system, we have got 8, 16, and 36 marks that we got from the weights. The domain of learning, theory, we thought we'll put 42 marks, and skills we'll look at 18 marks. So that is how it is distributed. It is adding up to 60. Here it is adding up to 60. The tools of assessment, if we decide that MCQ should be 30 marks, SAQ should be 12 marks, and OSCE should be 18 marks, again it is adding up to 60. So see, cognitive domain, which usually talks about the MCQs and SAQs, it is 30 plus 12, it adds up to 12, 42 here. And the skill assessment, which shows and does 18, and 18 is here. So it matches everything, and we have distributed the marks into the 3 subjects. Now let's come back. So it is the table of specification. To understand, you have to imagine about an onion. So how do you take out? So when you peel the onion, you will get one layer by the other. So in this case, let's start from the periphery. Now the total marks that was allotted for this hypothetical example is 60, and what did we decide? That the subjects were given 8, 16, and 36 marks. So this is how we reached 60. We also decided that the MCQ should be containing 30 marks, so short answer questions will be 12 marks, and the practical assessment will be 18 marks. So it is coming to 60 again. So from the external, all the boundaries were covered. Now if we go to the next part, now you remember we decided that the nose component should be 1/3. For example, I'm just giving an example. This is again up to discussion. We can take 50%, we can take more weightage for nose, 60% can also be given. It is up to you to decide. But in this example, I have taken this nose component or lower order thinking for 1/3 of the total marks. So from MCQ, 1/3, 10 mark goes for the nose component. SIQ out of 12, 1/3, 4 mark goes for the nose component. And in the practical, usually it is not very it is not very easy to differentiate it, hence we have left it like that. Now the other what is remaining is your nose howl level. So nose howl level is 2/3 marks out of 30 goes for nose howl, and 8 out of 12 goes for nose howl. So this is how the table looks like. So this is a table of specification. The only thing that is missing here is the item number of questions that you are going to ask. So we now let's look at this cardiovascular system. It has got 36 marks. And how did we decide? The 36 marks we got from weightage. Now the 36 marks, out of that 18 are MCQs, and these are the 7 marks, 18 plus 7, 12, 25 and 11. Here you are getting odd numbers because our sample is very small. This three in that's why it is approximation. So otherwise it should be all even. It will come down to that. So now the next is this. Now the table becomes more complicated because we have now added the number of questions, or as in the Western literature it says items. Now MCQ, there is no confusion. One item carries 1 mark, so 10 questions will carry 10 marks. 20 questions in the nose how component will carry 20 marks. This short answer question, 1 mark in this carries one question will carry 1 mark. Knows how 1 question will carry 1 mark. This can be the short answer question. What we can do is we can also club and make it structure. So in 2 mark short answer question, we can have 2 components. One component will address to the nose, and the other component will address to the nose howl level. So this can be done. So when we see our example, we'll see how we have classified. So it comes 7 questions, we'll have 12 marks. This is coming 7 because our sample size is quite less, quite few. It has got 3. So that's why we are getting this odd number. Now OSCE stations, we decided 6 stations with 18 marks. So each station will carry 3 marks. But in the cardiovascular system, 3 systems will carry 11 marks. It is all because of sampling error that is happening here. So this is ultimately how the table of specification will look like. Now the last component. So as of now, what we have done is in the first section, we discussed the need of a blueprint and what is a blueprint, how it helps. The second component, second section, we saw how do you develop a blueprint and hypothetical example, and also in a real life scenario. And in the third, we are looking at some challenges of developing a blueprint. Now, what are the challenges? The first thing, questions are usually asked, should it be shared with the learners? Yes, we should share with the learners because ultimately it is for their benefit. Some people say if we share blueprint with them, then they can predict the question and they can write. But the blueprint, if it is made in such a way, we are covering the must-know areas and important topics there. It is good that they learn those topics and master that particular domain. So it should be shared. It should be shared with the question paper setters. It could be shared with the to the learners, and also it should be shared with the teachers who are handling the teaching learning methods. How often we should revise the blueprint? That is a common question people usually ask. So see, the blueprint, ideally in literature, they say it should be changed every 1 to 2 years, which is very difficult. We revise it every 5 years because we consider that the disease profile in the community doesn't change before 5 years. So that is how we plan it. There is no right or wrong answer. You can do it every 2 years if you have resources to do it. If you can do that, that is fine. But 5 years, we should revisit the blueprint. Is it a method to improve performance? So having a blueprint, does it increase student performance? I looked at literature very carefully, but I could not come up with any literatures documenting this. Probably this is another way of conducting educational research. One paper I got in 2005 where they said that the performance level was equal. It was a small study done in 35 students in the UK. So that was the conclusion. The conclusion was it didn't improve their performance, but they have given a caveat saying that it was a very small study, and it was what we should do is we should try this and try to document whether it improves performance. But it's a very, very rewarding exercise. It makes things very, very clear to to a lot of people, and ultimately the students benefit out of it. Sometimes there is a question that whether MCQ be a part of summative assessment. There is no right and wrong answer again for this. It depends upon in your university, but addition of MCQ to summative assessment increases the scope. You can cover many things in MCQ, but the formation of MCQ is a problem. What happens is MCQs are asked, all of these questions are true except. So we usually limit ourselves to the lower order thinking or recall level, which is a which is underutilization of the potential of MCQ to my mind, because MCQ is a very nice tool to assess a variety of domains. We can do real life scenario. We can talk about, we can give higher order thinking skill, but it takes training, it takes practice, it takes validation, and there are other issues related to it. I think to sum up, these are the topics that we discussed. Explain the need of having a blueprint, the process of developing blueprint. There are some challenges of developing a blueprint, but ultimately we should give a thumbs up for our developing a blueprint on our specialty. If you do it, it's a very rewarding exercise, and I have enjoyed developing blueprint for Department of Community Medicine, and it's really nice and satisfying experience. So finally, if we have a blueprint, the students will be happy. They were very sad at the starting point, beginning of our session, but I hope with this, if you as teacher or facilitator develop blueprints and share with your learners, they will be happy and they'll look forward to your session. So I do acknowledge that the role of Department of Medical Education in my journey in medical education. PSG FEMER Regional Institute, where I have done my fellowship, and I'm also faculty there. Department of PSM from Learning, and all my teachers who have given me this opportunity, and all my colleagues in the Department of Medical Education and TTC. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And these are some suggested readings that will be shared with you. And we'll be happy to take some questions and if there are some clarification. Thank you so much for your time.